In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. Sharon Michalove writes romantic suspense and traditional mystery as well as being a published historian. After growing up in suburban Chicago, she spent most of her life in a medium-sized university town, working as an academic professional as well as teaching history. She was married to a composer and frequently uses her knowledge of music, history, and food to enrich her novels. A hockey fan, Sharon moved back to Chicago in 2017 so she could go to the Blackhawks games and spend quality time at Italy. Sharon joins us to discuss her writing and her latest trilogy, Global Security Unlimited.
Okay, so the first book starts in late 2014. And essentially what happens is that this guy who works for GSU sees this woman on television that she's pushing her new book. And he realizes that 20 years ago, she was the woman who knocked him down with her bicycle at Oxford in England. And he was smitten. He's about 5 years younger than she is. And in the 5 minutes that they had together, he was really intrigued. And all she wanted to do was escape. So here it is. Yeah. So here it is 20 years later, and he sees her on television and she's going to be doing a book signing. So he shows up for the book signing. In the meantime, she's being threatened by, she's getting these anonymous texts that are very threatening. And when he shows up at this book signing and says, I think we met 20 years ago. And she's like, so she thinks that maybe he's the person who's threatening her. He's not. He invites himself out to dinner with her and her friends. And he spends a lot of time trying to get her to kind of pay attention to him and not kind of keep pushing him away. But in the meantime, because she's getting these threats, he also gets involved in trying to figure out who the person is. And we know who the person is pretty early on. I don't always hide that. So the main thing with the person who's actually persecuting her, who's essentially she's trying to ruin her career by accusing her of plagiarism, and then it accelerates. I mean, it becomes much more than that by the end. So the suspense is, what is this person going to do next? And it gets to things thrown through her window, and then her apartment is set on her condo set on fire, all kinds of things like that. But in the meantime, he's also struggling with his own issues. And because he is a former spy and he keeps secrets and all that kind of thing, and her whole life people have betrayed her, she doesn't take very well to that. So they really have to figure out kind of how they're going to make this work. And by the end of the book, so I should say, a friend of mine writes romantic suspense as well, and so she always winds up the romance and then she winds up the suspense. I'm the opposite. I resolve the suspense and then I wind up the romance. So we have very different approaches on that, and I do that with all the books. So in the second book, in 2005, the same person, Max, had been in Turkey and he was involved in the terrorist attack, and he was responsible for making sure that the terrorist was put into prison. And now, 10 years later, this terrorist has escaped from this high-security Turkish prison and is threatening him. So, and they're on their way to Europe, and this guy's it's easier for this guy to get up in Europe than it is for him to try and travel to the United States. So, so that whole book is really about Max trying to figure out where this guy is, where the threat's coming from. They go from Chicago to London, to the Highlands of Scotland, to Paris, and it winds up in outside of Paris at the end. It's a very exciting ending to that one. So then the third book has a very similar timeline to the second book, and that was very challenging because it's JL, who's the ex's colleague and best friend, and Mickey, who's Cress's best friend, and they've kind of gotten interested in each other. But in the meantime, Mickey found out that her boyfriend that she'd been kind of sort of living with for 8 years has been cheating on her, and she throws him out. But it turns out he's not a very stable person. So he's stalking her and he's threatening her and all these kinds of things. Well, JL's on the personal security side of the company. So he's arranging for all this protection for her and all these kinds of things. But they get really involved. In the meantime, he goes off with Max and Crest to London. And then Mickey's supposed to meet them in Paris because she works for a law firm and she's trying to make partner in this law firm. So she also has somebody who's trying to keep her from making partner in this law firm. So anyway, they end up leaving Paris, where she was afraid this guy was going to show up, and going to Vancouver, which is where JL's originally from, and tangling with his mother, who wants him to marry somebody who's A, French-Canadian, B, Catholic, and C, can give her grandchildren. And my two characters are 46 years old, and that's not going to happen. So this is a big problem. And in the meantime, his former girlfriend, who dropped him when he was in the military, has come back, and his mother's trying to get her back together with her son, and she has two sons, so she would have a built-in family. So there's all these various things that are going on, and in the end, they go back to Chicago, and she's gotten back because they've had this big fight. And he has to bring his mother to Chicago. He's moving her there because she's got heart problems, and it would be easier for her if she was in Chicago with him than in Vancouver. And this guy comes out to the plane and puts the plane under siege. So again, it's a very exciting ending, but it begins and ends with karaoke.
Sharon Michalove is our guest. Her website is coffeeandeclairs.com. Sharon, you've been an academic and a teacher for much of your life. How did you become a writer?
I've been a reader all my life. So my mother read to me when I was little. And so one day I said to her, many years later, I was probably in my 30s at least, I said to her, so, at a certain point after my brother was born, you stopped reading to me. Is that because you had to, pay attention to him instead? And my mother says, no, it's because by that time you could read on your own. You didn't need me to read to you anymore. So I'm a huge reader. I always have been. I started reading Agatha Christie at 10, and I always wanted to be a writer. I just wasn't any good at it. And then I got to college, and I was going to major in English, so I figured that would help. Then I discovered that I was not cut out to be an English major at all. I didn't like to analyze books, which I do all the time now as an author, but I didn't do that. But I loved history, and I had always been good at history. My dad was a history teacher. So I ended up getting my degree in the teaching of social studies, and then I became an editor for a publishing company because there were no jobs in teaching. In 1972, the market that had been, screaming for teachers, suddenly the bottom dropped out, and there was a glut, no jobs. So I went to work for Scott Forsman Publishing Company as a trainee editor. Then I was slowly living at home with my parents, so I went back to college to grad school, and that's where I met my husband. And I ended up becoming a historian, and so I published, but I didn't publish novels. So I didn't really go back to fiction writing until 2018 after I moved up to Chicago. And I needed book boyfriends to talk to me because I was a lonely widow.
You're known for your dedication to research, and you paint rich geographic backdrops for your stories. How many of the locations have you visited firsthand?
Well, I think the locations are easy because I love to write about Chicago. A lot of it's about Chicago. In fact, when I wrote about Vancouver, that was one of the few times I wrote about a place I'd never been to. But I loved doing the research, and I know a bunch of people. I'm in some groups with some people who are in Vancouver, and I'm also writing with a group that's in Montreal, so that helped with all the French Canadian stuff. But I'm a real foodie, so I love to write about restaurants. And if I'm going to write about restaurants, I tend to get very detailed. So I talk about the food, I talk about the decor, and I talk about all this kind of stuff. So I do a lot of that, but I've also been pushed by some of my romance writer friends to be more descriptive. It took me a long time to get to the point where I was showing more and telling less. To me, that was one of the hardest things to do because as an academic writer, you're telling people stuff all the time. You're not showing people anything. And it was very hard to kind of move out of that mold. And I think that I finally kind of gotten the hang of it. But probably if you read my first book, which is still the most popular, I tell a lot more. But I also don't want to show all the time. I have friends that all their book is showing, and I get tired. And there are times when I don't need to know that somebody is leaving the house. So they walk across the room, they put on their coat, they pick up their keys, they walk out the door, they lock the door, they get in their car, they put the key in the ignition, and then they give you the whole drive across town. It's kind of like I have them walk out the door. The next scene, they're where they need to be. I don't need to do their trip across town unless something is going to happen in that space. And I still read a lot of authors, even authors that I like who still do that. They have to take you through every signal thing. And I still write scenes that I absolutely love that go nowhere. And then it's kind of like, well, this is all well and good and it's beautifully described, but it doesn't move your story forward at all in any possible way. But I have gotten good at that. Now the emotion's a whole other thing. I usually don't get to the real emotion until the second draft.
We're in conversation with Sharon Michalove. Her captivating Global Security Unlimited series is available in digital, paperback, and audiobook. Learn more about her passions at her website, coffeeandeclairs.com. Sharon, do you participate in critique circles?
Yeah, so essentially it took me 4 tries to find a critique group that I could work with. And one of the reasons that we work so well together, and it's kind of funny because several people are mostly thriller writers and they're always like, oh, you're slowing down the action. This is all about relationships and there's no action going on here. And I'm like, 50% of the book has to be romance. Romantic suspense, 50% of the book has to be romance. And you've got to establish those relationships. And you can't always do that by blowing something up or having somebody pulled out of danger. I mean, you do that too, but when you're a thriller writer, that's not the way you write. You have things happening all the time. So we're always having those discussions. But so there's 5 people in my critique group, including me. And so we have one person who writes traditional mystery. We have one person who's really pretty literary. We have one person who writes kind of psychological suspense. And we have one person who does thriller mostly. But the good thing is that a lot of times we're not meeting our deadlines. We're not sending something to each other every week, but we're meeting every week. And if we don't have somebody's writing to talk about, we talk about writing and we talk about problems and we talk about other things. So we're a very supportive group, which is really good. And I can proudly say that our one unpublished writer in the group, one of our 2 unpublished writers in the group, was a finalist for the MWA Midwest Hugh Holden Award, and the other one won it as a non-member. So out of the 2 awards, we had 2 people that were, one almost made it and one made it. So I thought that was pretty good. So I have them, and then I have this friend who has been working on learning the craft of writing a mystery. She's writing kind of a cozy mystery. That I have breakfast with every 2 weeks. She lives down at the Hancock building. So this week we met up in my area in Rogers Park, and in 2 weeks we'll be meeting back down in the Loop, Magnificent Mile area. And we talk about writing. And I read stuff if she gives it to me, but she's kind of taking all the story grid stuff over 3 years, so she doesn't always have something. But she'll talk about what she's working on. But if I have something for her to read, she'll read it. And she's read some pretty rough drafts of things. And, when your reader says to you, okay, so I'm reading the second book now, and I don't think that Max would react like this at this point. I'm like, my character's better than I do. And then I have beta readers. But I never have many. I usually try and have 3, 5 at the most. Because I don't need to have 15 people telling me what they don't like. It gets too muddled. And I like to have an odd number so that if 2 people agree and the third person doesn't, I can see that split. But frequently what I find is that everybody's got some different concern from each other, which is good because then I get to decide whether that matters to me or whether I think they misinterpreted something or something like that.
You write both long-form novels and have a short story collection in circulation, Relatives and Relationships. Which format is harder to write, the novels or the short stuff?
The short stuff. Because I usually not some of the short stories in that collection I wrote as things that I wasn't submitting for anybody, and I could make them however long I wanted. So I decided the first one I ever did was called "It's Just a Guise," and it's because I wanted a Halloween story for my newsletter readers. So I wrote that, and then at Christmas time I wrote another one that was called "A Heartfelt Christmas." Both of those have Max and Cress as their main characters, and one of the things I try to do that makes it a little bit easier is to connect the short stories to my books. Because then I already have created the world, I already know the characters, and that helps a lot. But then I wasn't really planning to write a lot more, and then Sandra Sullivan, who's part of Capital Crimes, had contacted me and said, "Hi, I'd like you to write a short story for this collection I'm doing, because you write older characters, and this is going to be about much older characters. My characters are mostly in their 40s. And I had been working on a cozy mystery that I'm still working on called Murder at the Great Jane Austen Cook-Off. And I had a character in there named Lady Agatha Carstairs. And so I wrote that story about her. And so it goes along, it will go along with that cozy mystery series once I get the first book done. And then I wrote one for Malice Domestic, which they didn't take. That's called Chasing Donatello. And so I was when they didn't take it, I sent it to Blackbird Writers, because I should give them a plug. I am a member of Blackbird Writers, and we're a writing consortium of 24 writers who work in all different fields of mystery, everything from YA to thriller to, pretty much everything. Some people have some paranormal elements in theirs. And so we try and support each other in our publishing efforts. And they have a book of short stories called Taking Off, which they've been giving away for free as a newsletter thing, but a few people dropped out and some new people came in, and so they wanted to do a new version of that, and then they decided to do one called Provoked. And so I have a story in Provoked, which is called Leaving Cleveland, which is about one of my detectives in Dead in the Alley, Wayne Fairchild, and why he left Cleveland and went to Sherburne, Michigan. And the other one, that's Chasing Donatello, was a standalone thing that I wrote because it had to be international. And it's about two people who get involved in a murder case because everybody's trying to find what they think are these papers and drawings that were left by Donatello. And Donatello there's nothing. There's no documentation at all. There's only his sculptures that are left. But somebody says that they've found this trove, and of course everybody wants it. So it started out being kind of a Maltese Falcon sort of thing, and then it kind of changed over time. But when they didn't take it, and it didn't have to be 5,000 words anymore, I was able to do some revision and make that work better. And right now I'm trying to do the same kind of thing. I was asked to revise and resubmit for another anthology that's on larceny. So I've been writing a larceny story. And essentially the editor said to me, well, you've got a bunch of stuff in here that doesn't move the story forward. So if you could rewrite the story, and then you can add some more, you could add more about the larceny plot because you'll have a space for it. So that's what I've been doing. It's called Vanishing Trees. And it's all about people who are stealing trees out of other people's yards.
We're with Sharon Michalove, prolific creator of both short stories and alluring romantic mysteries like her Global Security Unlimited series. What's next, Sharon?
The next thing that's comes out this month, and it's a second chance romance. And it's about a former hockey player and a photojournalist. And it takes place on an Antarctic cruise. And I wrote it when I was on an Antarctic cruise last February. I wrote it on the ship. I've signed contracts for 12 stories of between 5,000 and 15,000 words that have to be done in 2024 and 2025. So the next one up is called Code Silver. It's for a volume that's called, it's romantic suspense. So it's Protectors. And so I'm using characters from GSU for this story. And then I'll make it longer when I get it back. Because, they go into these volumes for 4 months and then you get them back. And then you can do what you want with them. So I'll probably turn it into maybe double the amount, up to 30,000 words. It'll be a novella in the series. But it takes place in Chicago, and this woman has come to write stories about GSU. She's a cyber reporter, cybersecurity reporter, and they're a cybersecurity firm. And but it turns out, because she'd written this whole thing on cyber criminals, that she's being targeted by this hacker group. This is something that came out of I read a story about this, and I was just totally shocked. It used to be that if you were targeted, it was your server that was targeted, or your email, or, that kind of stuff, where they tried to steal your identity. Not anymore. They hire assassins to come and kill you. So that's what happens. And so she gets to Chicago on this plane, and the first thing she sees is this explosion in San Francisco. And when they get the drone in there, it's her house that's been blown up. So now she has nowhere to live, and she's in Chicago for a month. And so she's got to work with this company, and the guy who's supposed to take her around and be her kind of guide for the whole time resents this, because he's got his own job to do and he doesn't want to do this. And then when they do the deal for exactly how this is going to work, he not only has to take care of her during the day with the company, but he has to go out with her and stuff like that, so that she's always got somebody around. She doesn't know anything about Chicago and all that. And he's a former Navy guy, and he's got a sailboat on Lake Michigan, and he's playing a race in the race to Mackinac. And so he ends up having to have her as part of his crew, and they go out on this trip. They've just gotten back to the slip in Belmont Harbor, and somebody starts shooting at them. And then this explosive is thrown and blows up the boat next to them. And so they have to take off again. And then they're being chased by this speedboat through this storm. And it's an exciting 15,000 words. But there is some romance in it too.
Sharon Michalove is the author of the Global Security Unlimited series and a plethora of both short and long-form fiction. When she's not cheering on the Chicago Blackhawks or enjoying delicious Windy City cuisine, she can be found online at coffeeandeclairs.com. Sharon, thanks for joining the conversation.
Oh, I loved this. I'm willing to come back anytime and just talk about whatever.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.